The empire was big, and they shared their knowledge. The empire brought peace, so knowledge could be shared freely. Trade allowed knowledge to be shared. There were 70,000 miles of road. Don't write that number down, but they were able to share their knowledge quickly. There was one language. Easy to share knowledge. The Romans valued education, and learning would lead to progress. As a rule, Romans were not trusting of doctors. Normally, in a home, the doctor would be the man of the house, the father of the family. And they didn't trust foreigners. They allowed a couple of Greek doctors to practice, Galen being one of them. Okay? And Galen is the most important doctor of this period. He was a Greek who worked in Rome. And Galen took the ideas of Hippocrates, continuity, and made them better, progression. Galen, Claudius Galen. You're going to find it very easy to tell me why Galen was bad, because we always associate Galen with his mistakes. You also need to remember that Galen was more than just his mistakes. He was a brilliant doctor. You just happen to remember him because he made mistakes. Okay, so Galen himself then comes back 500 years after Hippocrates. His ideas are based upon Hippocrates. There's your continuity. He carries on the work of Hippocrates. Hippocrates believed in the four humours. He added to the theory of the four humours. He brought in the theory of opposites. If you're hot, make yourself cold, for example. If you're sweating, put them in a dry place. Yeah, the theory of opposites. I know you frown because it sounds stupid, but at least it was a natural attempt to explain what was going on. He didn't say, right, go to the temple, say a prayer. He was using some kind of reasoned, natural approach. It's definitely the 30% that's scientific of Roman medicine. To understand how the body works and where parts of the body are, anatomy and physiology. He didn't just read other people's books, he carried out experiments. We believe that most of those experiments and those dissections were carried out on animals because of the mistakes he made. Galen claimed to have dissected humans. It's a very brave thing to say because religion normally stops people dissecting human bodies. We believe that Galen was lying, that he didn't carry out dissections on humans because of some of the things he said were the truth. Turned out not to be the case. He was that good that he was the Roman emperor's doctor. But most important about Galen is that his beliefs were unquestioned for 1,000 years. His mistakes were unchallenged for 1,000 years. When the Roman Empire ends, it's the Catholic Church that say, hey, we like what Galen says. The bad guys in this story, it's not Galen for making mistakes. We all make mistakes. The bad people in the story of medicine are the people who don't allow Galen's ideas to be challenged, and that was the church. Now, I want you to be thinking about that, my A stars, my A's and my B's. Galen made mistakes, yes, who doesn't? But not allowing his mistakes to be challenged. That's nothing to do with Galen. That was the church that stopped his ideas being challenged. Now, obviously, as we go through this, I'm not even dwelling on the mistakes that he made. You should know them. But you want to tell me what they were? The mistakes Galen made? Good. He claimed that the jawbone was in two parts. It's the case in dogs, I believe, but not in humans.
And the left kidney side.
Good. The level of kidneys. It's the case in monkeys, but not in humans.
It's the other way around.
The other way around. Okay. See, I make mistakes like Galen did. Yeah. The mistake is not making the mistake. The mistake is not allowing you to question me about it. Right? These mistakes went unchallenged for 1,000 years. Now, just goes to show you just how strong the church must have been, because I can't imagine it was that hard in such brutal times to find a skull. And you look at the skull has one jawbone.
But can you just feel it yourself, though?
You can feel it yourself.
Why not?
You tell me. The church was that powerful. The church was that powerful. Okay? So, yes, Galen made mistakes. Galen was bad on that count. But Galen, gentlemen, was brilliant. He took Hippocrates' ideas, he made Hippocrates' ideas even better. And he's not trying to explain illness in some kind of supernatural way. He's using science to explain it. And there's a picture of it. Okay. So the progress. How did Roman medicine progress? Well, peace allowed Romans to practice medicine. War can be good for medical discoveries. Think about Paré. If Paré hadn't been a battlefield surgeon, he wouldn't have made his discoveries. If there hadn't been World War II, we probably wouldn't have had penicillin as early as the 1940s. But peace can also be helpful for medicine. Roman temples were often early schools. Temples were centres of learning. Often the smartest people went into the temples to be priests. The Romans had the first dedicated hospitals in history. Even Hippocrates hadn't thought of that idea. The Romans were a practical people. If there was a problem, they came up with solutions. If people were dying of disease, they came up with a public health solution. They'd build an aqueduct. They'd build a sewer. They'd build a public bath. They had a town that was 200 miles away from a source of water. They'd build an aqueduct to bring the water to the town. They were a practical people. And their public health, because of all of that, was the best in history until what was happening here in the 19th century. That's either a massive compliment to the Romans, that their public health was that good, or it makes you realise just how bad things were after the Romans. Public health, anywhere in the world, was worse than the Romans until 150 years ago. That's like 1,500 years of things getting worse. Not better, worse. So what was it that made Roman public health so good? Well, you have to realise, when they built Rome, it had 1 million people living in it. Now, this classroom has to be cleaned every single day because it probably has about 150 kids come through it each day. Children are messy. They're dirty. You want to go into Plymouth city centre on a Saturday morning and you see the people, the public health workers, the cleaners, the street cleaners, the street sweepers, clearing up the mess that people have left on a Friday night. If it's not done, people will die of disease. And of course, being at Plymouth, pigeon poo as well. You have to clean it up. If we didn't clean this room every day, people would be dying of disease. I wonder how long it takes a ground-in ham sandwich on the carpet to become literally contagious. Imagine 1 million people. Imagine 1 million people without toilets. And Rome's a hot city in the summer. Can you imagine the smell? So they had to come up with solutions to deal with 1 million people. And they realized that preventing the disease was a darn sight easier than curing it once it started. I mean, one of the Roman techniques for curing the plague was if plague broke out in one city block, they quarantined off the block and they burnt the block down. Then they'd have to compensate everyone for burning it down. That was expensive. Give them clean water, give them sewers, problem solved. The Romans had the common sense. They realized that if you build cities in the middle of swamps, people die of malaria. Seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Seems pretty obvious to us. Not people back then, not people after the Romans. So the Romans knew where to build their cities. The Romans realized it was far cheaper and easier to stop disease in the first place than fighting it once it had broken out. Prevention was better than cure. So then we have the list of what the Romans built in order to make sure public health was good. Now remember, strong government collect taxes which are then spent on public health. So they built sewers. I might be mistaken, but those sewers are still in use. And I'm not saying that rude about modern day Italy. I'm saying that to compliment how good the Romans were. Every major town would be planned and built with a sewer system to remove waste far beyond the town's limits. These were incredible engineering achievements. The sewers were often named after the emperors. Now, when you actually think what flows through those sewers, you might think that's an insult, but the Romans took it as a compliment. Yeah? We named that sewer after the emperor, whatever, because it's full of, you know. But nonetheless, you know, they were proud of what they did. They built aqueducts. And I've forgotten what this one's called. The Ponte something in France. It's still there today. Incredible engineering achievements to solve practical problems. You want to build a city there, there's no water, bring the water to the city. You actually think how hard it must be to do that when you actually think that obviously you know water only flows downhill. If the incline is too steep, the water will spill out the top. If it's too slow, the water won't flow. And these aqueducts stretch over hundreds of miles. There's one there. The Romans have a naval base at Mycenium. There's no fresh water at Mycenium, so they built the Aqua Augusta. Look at the size of that.
Why don't you lay us to the aqueducts?
I don't know. Oh, we'll skip over that. If you don't want to read that, you can read that on the film. We put this on. We've got the public baths. Fantastic places. Wherever the Romans went, they built their roads. Wherever the Romans lived, they built their sewers. Wherever the Romans stayed, they built their public bathhouses. And they were smart. They were big, they were clean, they were attractive. They wanted people to go to them. But the Romans also realized that anyone could catch disease and anyone could pass disease to other people. So it was essential that everyone could use the public baths. So the prices to getting admission were so low that even the poorest people could go. Now, admittedly, I think the wealthy people refused to bathe at the same time as the poor people. But nonetheless, it meant that everyone in Rome was clean. Public toilets. Cities and towns in their central squares would have toilets for people to use. Because the Romans were smart, they realized that waste, human waste, was somehow connected to disease. They probably thought you caught it from the smell. Their ideas would probably have been wrong, but they knew it was dangerous.